For those of you joining in that may know the Oak Barrel, we did run lots of wine tasting events here in the store, based around what we like, what we love, what we're really enjoying at the time. And obviously, due to something that I'm sure we're all quite familiar with, we have been unable to do that the last couple of weeks. So to sort of adapt to that, we've started up these virtual tastings, which you may have seen doing the rounds on our social media, with the likes of wine, whiskey, gin, Armagnac, rum, and everything else. So for those joining in on the Zoom, you will have 2 wines in front of you, hopefully cold, that we're gonna taste tonight. But for those of you that are maybe a little bit new to the Oak Barrel and might be your first tasting here, my name's Joe Perry. I'm the wine buyer here at the Oak Barrel, sort of responsible for all the good and bad decisions that are made for the wine side of the store. But tonight is quite special. When we sort of put the concept of these tastings to light of how to get them out, obviously whiskey was quite an easy one, being able to access smaller tasting bottles and mail them out. Wine was a little bit trickier, so I was slightly hesitant to start putting virtual tastings together for you guys and trying to figure out how logistically we could manage to get tasting bottles in front. But we sort of hit the ground running with this system of mailing out two different wines to you, and then jumping here on Zoom and Facebook and tasting along together. And the response and support has been outstanding from some of our long-term customers, and also some lots of new faces that we're welcoming from all across Australia to our Oak Barrel tasting experience. Now, so far we've done a few with sherry and with Burgundy, and you might have seen that sort of comes down to what we're liking, and it's easy for us to sit down and get a webcam and go through them. And initially, that's what this was going to be. I was going to sit down here on my own and open 2 bottles of Riesling and taste with you guys. And then I sort of got in contact with our very, very, very good friends at Cellarhand, and it has turned into something quite unique. So joining us here with the tasting tonight, we have Cellarhand sort of, I guess, German and an Austrian wine expert, Ed Merrison. Just next to him, you might see in the Zoom chat, another very good friend of ours, Harry Seville, who was kind enough to give me all of these bottles to send to you. And then lastly, we have Matthias Müller joining us all the way from Germany, who actually has a wealth of experience at both of these wineries. So you can imagine I'm quite excited about this, and I have been for quite a long time. But guys, welcome. What do you all say?
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I guess this sort of stems from a personal passion of mine, which is German Riesling, and since my stint here at the Oak Barrel over the last 3 years, I've enjoyed selling enormous amounts of European and Australian Riesling here in store. But it seems like almost every single day, at least probably twice a day, I think I always get the question when guiding people towards Rieslings from Europe. There's either an immediate scowl that it might come out as some sort of sweet syrup-like drink, or just a common, I don't like European Riesling, it's too sweet, or is this a sweet Riesling? I don't want a sweet Riesling, I only drink dry wines. And in the store here, our entire Riesling fridge is all dry wines, yet it's still something we quite commonly find ourselves running into. And having a European wine background before jumping into Australian wine, it was something I never quite wrapped my head around. This common conception that all European Riesling is sweet. So that's really, really awesome to have this opportunity to share 2 incredible bottles of wine with an absolute wealth of knowledge here tonight. Sort of, I guess, Ed, that might lead me to you. I mean, you have a lot of experience here in Australia dealing with these wines as well. Would you sort of say that that's a common theme that goes throughout the New World?
Yeah, I think it is. I've always been a very big Riesling fan myself, and to be fair, I grew up in the UK. Sorry, apologies to anyone watching, but wasn't particularly actually into wine before I came to Australia. And my first wine I really fell in love with was, in fact, Riesling from South Australia, despite having grown up so close to Germany. So it was something that I've adored from the moment I tasted it, more than anything else, I think, because we traveled, my now wife and I, through Clare Valley and Eden Valley. We were cycling around, and one thing, it just left such an indelible print on me, that the wines that we tasted through that trip, I suppose we all love it when we're relative novices to wine, the fact that we can recognize something and just go, wow, that just takes me straight back to Watervale, Clare Valley. That wine, that signature of Riesling is so strong. But of course, yeah, we're talking about dry Riesling tradition here, absolutely. But since then, I've been the one, who always goes around to friends' houses with Riesling, and even to my friends, often get the comment, yeah, I don't really like sweet wine, and I have to explain it's not. But I guess in this discussion, obviously, we'll come up with, especially when we look at the wine from the Mosel, the fact that obviously there are a lot of beautiful sweet wines that are made over there. But at the moment in Australia, there's a huge interest in dry styles from Germany, and in our portfolio alone, all of the producers from Germany do produce a dry wine at roughly the same price that we're tasting from these two guys here. So yeah, it's pretty common. I don't know about Matthias over in Germany. How many times when you travel overseas, how many times you have to explain that not all German wine is sweet?
Well, it really depends where you're traveling. So actually in Europe itself, people are not linked to sweet and Riesling that much anymore. But especially when we're traveling to Asia and the US and Canada, it's pretty much focused on sweet. Riesling is always sweet or off-dry, juicy style stuff. And they're pretty impressed that Riesling can be dry as well and tastes fantastic. So, but people are getting more and more knowledge, and people are getting more and more into the dry style Riesling. And what's really interesting, I mean, from Schiefer, from our estate, from Clüsserath, from Mosel, there's a fine hab style, which is kind of more fruity style Riesling, and the dry one, which we're going to taste tonight. And it's really funny when people are saying, especially, well, I just drink sweet, and then you do a blind tasting with those two wines with just different residual sugars. They're always choosing the dry one because it's not dry doesn't mean it's kind of stuck on your throat or something like that. So it's just a different sugar level, and for me it's dry Rieslings especially. It's just a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I think so as well. Obviously, it's I think I'd probably go the other way than you, and it was maybe Mosel Riesling that really I fell in love with when I was just getting started in wine in general, not just Riesling. But it's always been this, like the wines we're going to taste tonight, but this impeccable balance of both acidity and residual sugar that I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later. But yeah, it's why we kind of do a lot of these things to share and get these in people's mouths and tasting along. But I would, obviously just my personal opinion, I do think that there is some, GG Riesling produced in Germany that will knock white Burgundy absolutely out of the water at the Grand Cru level. You will pay a tenth of the price for it as well. Yeah, I just love it pretty much. But yeah, I mean, Matthias, did you want to sort of jump into the first wine there? I'm sure we're all thirsty if we haven't already been imbibing at home.
Yeah, I would recommend all of you guys to open both bottles immediately. We do have, as explained earlier, it's one family. So even though it's on the one bottle there's Wittman and the other bottle there's Clüsserath, it's one family but two wineries. So it's Rheinhessen and Mosel. I'd say we jump directly into the presentation. We do have a really small presentation to get you a short overview about what we're doing at Clüsserath. And maybe I just talk through that a little bit, and then we're going to do questions afterwards. Maybe that's the easiest way of doing it. right, let me just make that. Oh God, computers.
Actually, Matthias, while you're doing that, do you mind if I just jump in a sec? Because having just talked about the preconception that Joe sometimes comes across with German sweet wines. Of course, the other comment that we always get as a preconception is that the labels are very confusing. And given that we're about to go into those presentations and listen to some crazy guy over in Germany, maybe it's just worth just very briefly to make sure that people are kind of able to follow which wine we're talking about and which region. I'll just bring the two of them up. So the first one that we're going to be talking about then, as Matthias says, is from Ansgar Clüsserath, this one here. So you have the producer name, Ansgar Clüsserath. The winemaker is Eva Clüsserath. So she's the daughter of Ansgar. The wine vom Schiefer, you're about to see what this is all about, but this just means from slate. The wine's grown on these incredible slate slopes that we're going to see some great pictures of. 2017, the vintage, and the word trocken here you'll see assures you that it's going to be a dry wine. And so Eva is the wife of Phillip Wittmann. So this is the wine, the region that Matthias is sitting in at the moment, that he mentioned to earlier, is the Rheinhessen. So Phillip Wittmann is the winemaker for Wittmann, and this is their estate Riesling. And again, you can see the word trocken again. Tells you it's going to be a dry wine. So those are the two wines that Matthias will be referring to in his presentation. I'll go over to you now, Matthias.
All right. Oh, I'm not allowed to share my screen actually.
Let's see if I can fix that.
Wait there.
Good to go now.
Now, yes. Now we're talking. All right. So yeah, as Ed explained earlier, so Ansgar Clüsserath, the father of Eva, who's now running the estate and who's responsible for all the winemaking and stuff. We're starting with a picture to get you an impression about what is going on in this crazy Mosel Valley. So the river you see is the Mosel, for sure. And then you see on the left-hand side the really steep slopes of the Mosel. It's a really impressive scenery, impressive landscape. And the Mosel is the river and the reason why viticulture and growing vines there is only possible, because without the river, which is keeping a lot of warm and a lot of sun, because we're in a really cold area of Germany, that wouldn't even be possible. But let's have a look at all the facts maybe first, and the maps for sure where we're talking about. So what you see is down on the right-hand side, obviously it's Germany. And then you see Berlin and Munich, and then you see Frankfurt. And this is the little Mosel Valley and the Mosel River, which is running through the west part of Germany. When you're looking closer to the map, you see on the one hand Trier on the left-hand side and Koblenz on the right-hand side. And in the middle part, you see Trittenheim. And what you see as well is that the Mosel itself has a lot of different turns and going up and straight and down. And this is one reason why the slopes in the Mosel Valley is really, really steep, because the river is kind of digging into the soil, and this gives really steep slopes in the Mosel, which is really typical. Yeah, looking again at a beautiful picture of Trittenheim and where the estate is located. So Trittenheim is a really small village, about 3,000 people living there. And this is one of those turns of the Mosel River. And then you see vineyards just everywhere. And what you do see as well is that on the right-hand side, where it's getting steeper and steeper, this is the best part. This is the so-called Trittenheimer Apotheke, but we're going to talk about that a little later. And on the other side, where the slopes are a little bit slower and it's not that steep, this is more used for, it's really interesting as well, but it's a different part. And the wine we're going to taste comes from different parts of this picture. And this makes it really interesting because you get a really good overview about what a Mosel Riesling is tasting about. Yeah, it's still a family business. As Ed said, it's her father and her mom who really got this estate into what it's now. I mean, Eva's first vintage was 2001, as far as I remember. So it's still a couple of years now that Eva has really a big influence on the wine style itself. And the history of the estate and of the family goes back to 1670. So yeah, I think that's quite impressive. And let's have a look on the facts. So as I said, it was founded in 1670 and it's really small. So we're talking about 5 hectares only. But you need to keep in mind, you've seen these really steep slopes, that this is, this is what you really would call work. Because there's no tractor, there's no machines, nothing in those really steep slopes. So it's really handwork. So you need a lot of time, a lot of patience for growing vines there. But the good thing is it all gets paid back by those beautiful, beautiful wines and these beautiful aromas and flavors you get. And what's pretty typical for Mosel as well is the soil type, which is slate. And this is, I think, one of the most interesting soil types for Rieslings. And especially because it gives a really distinctive, really special and unique taste of the Rieslings. All right, when we're gonna have a closer look, and maybe that's the one, that's the first good point where you maybe have a little sip of the from Schiefer, because now you can taste what we're really talking about. And you see here in on this map different sites where we do own vineyards. So in Germany, it's pretty common that it's not like in the Bordeaux area, or maybe sometimes in other parts and countries in the world. Vineyards are not around always the estate. So we do own blocks and vineyards spread all over the Mosel, for sure closer to the village we're located. But then you see those 4 different sites, which is Altärchen, Apotheke, Rosengärtchen, and Goldtröpfchen. Beautiful German names, hard to pronounce for other people. And the from Schiefer, what we're having now, comes from 3 of those 4 different sites. But we're going to talk about the wine later, so we not want to focus too much on that right now. Yeah, that's another beautiful picture on one of the most important sites, Trittenheimer Apotheke. So Apotheke means pharmacy, and the name comes not from the point that you call it pharmacy because when you drink a lot you feel better. That's actually not the case, but it would be a beautiful explanation. It comes from the point that people in former days and hundreds of years ago, they kind of planted different plants what really treated the people well, what you could use for kind of a pharmacy treatment. And that's where the name comes from. And it's really steep. It's always difficult to look on the picture and see how steep it is. But it's an unbelievable thing when you're standing there and looking down in the Mosel River. That's really impressive. Another really beautiful picture is the site of the Piesporter Goldtröpfchen, where we own some vineyards as well. And you see the huge Mosel Valley. It's a different soil type, but it's really beautiful as well. And the Trittenheimer Altärchen, which is right on the opposite side of the Apotheke. And it's not that steep as Apotheke, but you do have the slate as well. So the soil itself is a million years old, and it gives it's a little bit more heavy soil, so it gives a little bit more body and fruitiness to the wines. And in all that put together is what we're going to have in the from Schiefer, what we're going to taste tonight. And yeah, I think this is a beautiful picture of what slate looks like. I don't know how the quality of the picture is like in Australia, but you really see the gray slate, and it's really heating up. So it's kind of like if you're standing in a sauna when you're working there in the summer, because it's reflecting the sun and it makes it really warm. And there's almost no soil. So what you really have is really slate rocks, and it's impressive. And you see the vines, which is going like that. So super old vines, and we still have some blocks where the vines are up to 100 years old. Yeah. And I think this is a beautiful picture as well of the cellar. So what you see, there's no stainless steel. It's very narrow. People in the Mosel Valley tend to be really short. No, just kidding. But you do see oak barrels. So when you think of oak barrels, like in Burgundy or in France, what you see is here, it's mold everywhere, and it's dark oak because the oaks are really old. And the good thing is that old oak barrels doesn't give this oaky vanilla character to the wines. It's more for oxidation and for keeping the wines. And the cellar is really old, and this big oak barrels just gives the wine a really interesting, almost salty, flinty character. And we ferment in those oak barrels, and we're keeping the wines in the oak barrels for more than a year. And this is a huge treasury what we have here, because if you can't really buy that, so you really have to take care of those barrels a lot. And we're really happy that we do have so many big oak casts.
Actually, Matthias, if you can go back to that picture again.
Yeah.
One thing I think it's probably worth saying as well, I know we're going to be comparing two different German wines today, but those of you who are really used to Australian Rieslings as a reference point, really traditionally, so much of the wine that's fermented here as dry Riesling would be all stainless steel in the winery. So this would be a completely different thing from these old big barrels. It would all be shiny, pristine stainless steel tanks for the most part over here, almost exclusively actually. And also the whole with wild fermentation over there, that's just the wild vineyard and cellar yeasts to let the ferments go very slowly. It's generally considered with aromatic varieties like Riesling in Australia, a really risky thing to do because, life takes over and you end up with something quite incredible. But over here, it's been much more common to be really careful and use that stainless steel and use selected cultured yeasts to make sure that aromatic, pristine ferment goes exactly according to the winemaker's plan. It's only just now that you're going to get some of the more adventurous and it's really just a handful of Riesling makers who are have the experience and the sense of adventure to use these barrels and use those wild yeasts and get into this sort of old world style of Riesling. So it's a different world. Sorry, Matthias, back to you.
Yeah, that's 100% true. I mean, when you do ferment Rieslings in oak barrels, what we do with Wittman as well, what we're going to taste afterwards, is that you get Rieslings which get more tension, more structure, a little bit more positive phenolics, so a little bit of bitter aromas. And on stainless steel Rieslings is really fresh, really these green apple aromas and peach. It's a totally different style, but this is more settled, more delicate in my way as well. Yes, just a picture of the new labels, which arrived. Some of them arrived already in Australia, but with the next shipment, you all see those labels. We updated that a little bit. Let's jump to the wine itself. I don't know if I should stop the screen sharing and we talk a little bit more like that without a screen sharing. I think that makes more sense. Any questions so far, or everything?
We do have one actually that's just come through in the chat, actually from Dan Packham, for probably the Australians among us, but he just asks, is John Hughes at Riesling Freak the only winemaker in Australia that uses Foudres? I assume for Riesling. As far as I know,
Yeah, there's a few, but it would be the few people that have really, got the most, I suppose, long-lived reputation for really good Riesling that would use Foudre, not in the same sense, but often as a part of the main blend. So you'll get people like Franklin Estate make a German-style Riesling entirely in Foudre. But in their top wines now from the single vineyard as well, they'd use, say, 10% of the wine will be in Foudre. Bess in the Great Western, who actually have a really good Riesling tradition in Victoria, actually make a Foudre ferment wine and have done for about a decade. That's very nice. And yeah, there's a couple that I know of in Tassie, but yeah, it's still very, very rare here. It's just being taken on, as I say, by those people who really do put. If you think about those producers that really stake their claim as top Riesling producers, they're much more in tune with what's been happening over in Germany and Austria, and they visit those guys over there and have learned a lot of those techniques. But it's very, very far from a mainstream thing over here, for sure. Obviously, Riesling Freak, John Hughes is a massive fan of German Riesling. And I think he went over to the Wittman estate last summer, I think, and had a great old time. So yeah, there's a few guys like that are very in tune with those techniques.
Yeah, talking maybe a little bit about the wine itself. So the from Schiefer, as I explained, comes from different vineyards. The idea behind that is that we trying to combine the different flavor profiles of every vineyard, because every vineyard tastes different. Not only the wine after fermentation, as well as the grapes itself when you're going to taste it right before harvest. So we're harvesting everything by hand. And what we do is when we get the grapes back into the estate, we crush them really gently with the skins so that the juice runs a little bit out, and this just gives the wine more power and full-bodiedness. And then we press it really gently and put it more or less directly in those big oak barrels, what we've seen. And because they're so old and used for such a long time, it doesn't taste like those really oaky Chardonnays maybe some of you have in mind when we're thinking about oak and white wine, because you don't really feel it. And that's the idea, because it just gives the wine structure. And this is the main idea of using those big oak barrels. And for sure, we're fermenting with wild yeast. I mean, on the one hand, you have those yeasts you can buy in the supermarket where you're baking your bread or cake with. But on grapes as well, there's yeast as well. And this is the wild yeast or indigenous yeast. And that's what we're using. And the way you use them is pretty much the same. You just put the juice in the barrel and go up and drink a beer. And after 3 weeks, wine comes out. I mean, that would be the ideal world, but actually you have to check it every day and taste it and control it and do analytics in the lab. But at the end, it gives the wine more complexity and different flavor profiles.
We'll just jump in quickly, Matthias. If you just want to flick on Zoom and go to speaker view, that'll make you front and center for everybody following along at home on our Facebook.
Sorry again, I didn't.
In the top right-hand corner, there will be gallery view and speaker view in Zoom chat. And you just change that to speaker view.
Speak what? Sorry, I didn't really.
So your top right, or Alt F2 will do the same thing.
Sorry, I didn't get it. What should I do?
In Zoom, in the webinar.
Yeah.
There will be so us, the four of us.
Yeah.
So in the top right-hand corner, there'll be the full screen and gallery view or speaker view.
Yeah.
And you click speaker view.
No.
You know.
No, it's not working. Oh, maybe I have.
Oh yeah, that's it. Perfect. Oh, no, it's back.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Yeah, that's it. I just wanted I wanted people to be able to see just you when you're talking.
All right. Cool. Harry, what are you thinking about the wine?
too busy drinking it, Harry.
Yeah, I know. I love it. I like the dry, zesty kind of crispness that just it even though it is the middle of winter here, it is still really, it kind of sings and dances on the palate nicely, and you can, there's that length to it. It's just really nice and pleasant, and it's not.
So I think what's really typical from Schiefer, and you're totally right, that I mean, Rieslings from the Mosel always do have, because it's a little bit of colder area, always have a little bit of higher acidity. And what we do is that people not get scared of acidity and of Riesling is, after fermentation, we're leaving the wine on the lees. And this is the stuff what all the yeast left behind after fermentation, when they say, hey guys, we're done with fermentation, we don't want to work anymore. And what you get in those barrels is kind of it looks like clouds actually. And this is the settlement. And if wine stays on that for a really long time, it makes the wine a little bit more creamy and more round. So we're keeping that for about 1 year on the lees, how you call it. And this makes the wine a really interesting type of Riesling, because as you said, it's on the one hand, it's dancing on the palate, it's refreshing. You have these orange peel style a little bit for me. And on the other hand, it's creamy and round and full-bodied. And we're talking here about a wine which is 3 years old now. This is the entry-level Riesling from us. And the main idea of winemaking, doesn't matter if we're speaking about Clüsserath or Wittmann, is we want to make wines which do have a great aging potential, but still focuses on elegance, on delicate wines which are subtle and still so much fun to drink, with low alcohol levels. So we're talking about 11% of alcohol level for this wine. So it's just the perfect thing if you're going to have a nice breakfast. You just open the bottle and you're ready to go.
If I can just jump in as well, Joe mentioned earlier, I can't remember whether it was before we started or just as we were starting, about the balance of great Riesling, great German Riesling. But I suppose it's worth saying that it's very common with the idea of the residual sweetness in the wine. So a little bit of sugar in a slightly sweet wine would be very common in the Mosel, because you've got that very high acidity, and a little bit of sugar would, gives it a little bit of a sense that it's a little bit more at ease with itself. And to me, this vom Schiefer, I really love this wine, but I find it really walks that tightrope a lot. And if anyone's sitting at home thinking, wow, that's racy, it's got very, very high acidity, and it just walks that tightrope and makes it with that creaminess, with that fact that it actually has quite a lot of intense fruit flavor, but you definitely feel that that there's a piercing nature to it. And I find it very sort of enlivening, that's almost sour grapefruit pithiness to it, which I adore. But I would imagine that some people would find that a little bit challenging, because it's not a sweet round wine. It's just got a lovely tension to it, but a bit, it takes a little bit perhaps of getting used to, and I think it walks at that tightrope really well.
Yeah, I'd agree. And just say that especially with that, like you said, that tension, it also, I think, adds to the palate weight feel as well, which I feel carries fruit really, really well. We see a lot of Riesling here in Australia, a lot of very good Riesling, but also a lot of Riesling that, for me, can be quite one-dimensional, in that it's all up front, it's all aroma, but there's no length. Even though it might be packed full of acidity, it's not necessarily the longest wine. That's where I find that sugar acid balance really makes these remarkable styles that you're still tasting 30, 45 seconds after you've had a sip.
Yeah. And obviously we often hear the words, steely used with Australian Riesling. So that feeling that it's very sort of tight and linear, but almost like licking steel. But the one thing I think, if anyone, it puts the vom Schiefer Riesling in their mouth and gives it a little bit of a swish around, you'll also notice, I think, a little bit of puckering grip on the wine when you swallow it around your gums, which is I think as well. It's a lovely little bit of grip that gives you an extra sense. So we've got a winemaker in the room. Phillip Wittmann himself. We're still talking about your wife's wine, Phillip. It's very nice.
Good idea.
Okay, well, maybe now it's time to have a look at Phillip's wine now that he's here. Should we bring on that part of the presentation?
Yeah, we can jump to Wittmann for sure.
I just came in to ask Matthias what he's doing this day.
Let me just...
we did get a question that came through. It says, from Phil, says, do the barrels need to be recouped regularly, the larger barrels that we were talking about earlier, or do they tend to keep on their own for quite a long time, which I find to be quite interesting.
Well, it's a good question. I know that Phillip, I can't remember how old the oldest barrel in your cellar is, but I've got a feeling it's around 1900 or just before, is it?
It's the oldest cask are from 1891.
1891. So obviously you have to clean them out, or you get Matthias to clean them out. But do they have to be repaired, or are they so robust that they just keep?
Let's say it like this: that of course you have to be very careful with the cleaning and everything. And if you organize this in a perfect way, it's possible that nothing is to do with the cask for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. But for sure, in a question of humidity in the cellar, it means that the oak is getting more and more difficult after times. So it could mean that you have to change one part of oak in a cask and put it out like a puzzle and bring it back together with just one change or something like this. But some of the casks are 100% original, where nothing is yet necessary. And it's always these oak casks are used not with the idea to bring any wooden texture into the wine. It's always the question of micro-oxidation and temperature between fermentation and these things.
Very good. Well, let's have a look at some pictures of the Wittmann estate.
All right. Yeah. All right. So yeah, as said earlier, we're based in Rheinhessen. So you see again the map of Germany, and you see where Rheinhessen itself is really close to the Rhine River, where it's a little bit further east than the Mosel River. So it's a little bit of warmer area as well. When we're looking a little bit closer on the Rheinhessen itself, we see it's kind of like a triangle. Rheinhessen is the largest of the wine growing areas in Germany, and we're situated in the southern part of Rheinhessen, where Westhofen is written down here. So we're pretty close to the Rhine River, but we're not right at the Rhine River. Rheinhessen itself is really influenced by a lot of limestone soils, and on the other hand, we do have not much rain as well. So it's a pretty dry area. And on the other hand, it's warm enough to grow not only Rieslings as well as Pinot Noir and other Pinot varieties, but for sure, we're as a state focusing a lot on Riesling for sure. Yeah, a first picture of where we are actually. What you see here is one of the hills where we do grow Moorstein, one of our Grand Crus. And you see that it's gently, yeah, a little bit kind of like rolling hills, and you see a lot of vines. So actually what we're looking at is a south-facing hill, and Westhofen itself, it's a pretty big wine growing area. So a lot of different estates, a lot of different qualities of wines which are produced in Westhofen. But for sure, we're trying to focus on the best vineyards, especially in Westhofen. And you see those single vineyards down on the map on the slide. And Westhofen is pleased with 4 different Grand Cru sites, certified Grand Cru sites, which is yeah, pretty nice for us because we own vineyards in all of those 4 Grand Cru sites. Talking about the family business, pretty much the same as Clüsserath. Philip's father and his mom and Eva, his wife, all on one picture. His father is still managing a lot of the vineyards with his biggest experience, especially is something really helpful, I guess, for everyone. And Philip's mom is still the boss of the estate.
Sometimes it feels like this, that's true.
Especially when we're talking about all the administrative stuff and finances, and Philip and Eva, yeah, running the estate. Philip's first vintage was 2099?
Yeah, let's say I was responsible in 99 for the cellar, and I 100% started in 2000, yeah, like this. And 2000 was an awful vintage with a lot of rain and botrytis, and it was a nightmare. But 2001 was one of the best vintages ever. So let's say my second, third vintage has been a very good start.
All right.
What does for my own curiosity, what does a good German Riesling vintage look like in terms of weather patterns and that sort of thing?
Well, a good Riesling vintage in Germany is especially important that we do have a good bud break, early bud break, and on the other hand as well, cold nights during harvest. So what we, especially for us, it's talking about Wittman, is we don't want to have any botrytis. So lots of rain during harvest season is something horrible. But at the end, we don't want to have a too warm summer for sure, because we do not have much rain here. But we do have soils which can keep water really good. So quite a average summer, I would call it, is really helpful. And then during harvest season, no rain, cold nights. I think that's pretty.
Yeah, it's at the end, our goal is to produce perfect, healthy and ripe fruits. We do not like overripeness. We hate botrytis, but we also do not like unripe fruits. So usually we do have the chance here in the southern part of Rheinhessen to get ripe fruits year by year. But of course, climate could be so different in these days because vintage, and of course we also do see that there is a climate change, unfortunately. So we get more warmer vintage. On the other side, we still could have cold years where we have to fight to get the fruits ripe. And so we have to play in between these two lines. And so it's year by year a challenge, because you never know what the next few weeks will bring. And so you have to find out how to manage it with the solutions in the vineyard, bringing the fruit into the sun, for example, or giving some shadow through the leaf. Decisions you have to take in summer, and you never know what will come next. So it's a little bit like a poker game we do have in the last years. But that's a good point, that we also could say we have had a great vintage in 19, a great vintage in 18, a great vintage in 17, unfortunately with some hail, but without this was very good vintage. A great vintage in 16 and also in 15. So this means it's 5 years in a row in great quality. We have not to say that it's a strange situation, but you have to play the game, and you have to go into this challenge to bring best fruits actually on the point.
Yeah, Joe, just to give an Australian sort of spin on Philip's answer, he's not exaggerating. Those vintages have all been wonderful, but there's a difference between easy and good. The vintages have been really good in those years, but probably 15 would be the only one where any German winemaker said life was actually not too hard. Every other year there's been a lot of challenges, but the wines have turned out really well.
Yeah, I think every vintage should have its own fingerprint. that's something very important for us, that vintage by vintage is different. And of course, it's always a question if you like the fingerprint or not. And you have, for example, vintage like 15, where you have a good ripeness, but also a strong acidity. And this is a vintage where you need some time for development. And then you have other vintages where everything is perfectly in balance just in the beginning, like 18. And so always a question is what you prefer. Important for me in the way if a vintage is a good one, or maybe a great one, or just a usual one, or a bad one, is how good and healthy the grapes have been. And so we came from the point that I said 2000 was awful, and this was because of really bad grapes and a lot of selection work in the vineyard.
I see there's a question as well, actually, Philip, just from one of the people listening in about when you harvest. I know that it's very hard to say what's normal these days because the weather's all over the place. But it's a good question, actually, of course, because you're working in Rheinhessen and Eva in Mosel. Just to give the tasters an idea of when would be typical for you to harvest for your dry wines, and when would be typical for Eva to harvest for dry wines.
So we usually start around between the 10th and 20th of September in Rheinhessen, and Eva usually starts around the 10th to 15th of October with the season. So this shows that there is a vegetation difference of let's say around 3 weeks, and it's interesting to see that it's every year coming into the same way. So Eva is exactly knowing when I start picking Riesling, how many days it needs that she has to start too. So it's really interesting that it's year by year comparable.
Yeah, and again, if I can just put that into perspective for Australian growers, Clare Valley would be picking in quite often first half of February. So that's the last month of our summer here, whereas Philip wouldn't be starting until around the middle of the first month of autumn, and Eva into the second month of autumn. So it's considerably longer on the vine if you look at it that way compared to the Australian harvest, which of course, you know, in warmer conditions here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, giving you a short overview of what it looks like here in Westhofen at the estate. You do see on the upper left side the tasting room, on the right hand side the picture of the tasting room. We're sitting upstairs here in this building right now, and then you see the cellar from 1826, where we do have a lot of big oak casts as well. Some of you may see that the casts are bigger than the ones from the Mosel. Has nothing to do that we have that much more wine, but it's still a different. But we do, yeah. But it's just a different tradition of how oak barrels have been used in this area here in Rheinhessen and Pfalz, and in the Mosel. So what we don't call it Fude, it's Stückfass here in Rheinhessen. And on the right-hand side, the two presses where we press the grapes after the skin contact. Talking a little bit about the facts of the estate. As I said, we're in the southern part of Rheinhessen, and we're doing about 30 hectares in total. And from those 30 hectares, it's about 75% Riesling, 20% Pinot, which means Pinot Blanc, a little bit Pinot Gris and Pinot Noir, and some Chardonnay. And the other 5% is a little bit of, really traditional grape variety, which is called Silvaner. And Scheurebe, which is a special thing. As I said, it's all influenced by these really heavy limestone soils, what we do have here in the southern part of Rheinhessen. And we're doing organic viticulture since 1990. So we have 30 years of celebration this year. And since 2004, we're doing biodynamic as well. Yes, so it's actually Philip's father who started doing organic, and now after 30 years, I think it's really a long-term project you're working on. So it's nothing like you switch from conventional farming to organic and everything changed. It's a long-term process, and it really helps at the bottom line us to even produce better wines, better quality, and get healthier fruits with less botrytis. So we're trying to see it more in the way of improving the quality. Yeah, a look in the cellar again, a little bit closer. Our winemaker and cellar master as well, Georg, who's working, not like me, just sitting here drinking wine. With the big oak casts, it's just a fun way of working. And that's a short map of what we're doing here in Westhofen. So you see the green parts of the map, which are where everything is vineyards. So this is kind of like the entry level vineyards, and then you see the gray and the blue parts in the map. So the gray part is the Premier Cru vineyards, where we do have Gundersheim and Westhofen here in this area, and we have the blue spots, which is Grand Cru. So we do own, as I said in the beginning, 4 different Grand Crus, which is Aulerde, Kirchspiel on the one hillside, and on the other side, which is Brunnenhäuschen and Moorstein. All right. Short look on the classification, but I think drinking the Riesling is more fun than talking about the classification. So we're having the 2018 estate Riesling, which is 100% farmed from our own vineyards, which is really important for us. But we're going to talk about the wine afterwards, I think. Yeah. And we were quite blessed about the ratings what we just got from Robert Parker and James Suckling. So even the guys in America like German Rieslings, so we're pretty happy. All right, and I would say everyone who's not have the wine in his glasses, let's start tasting the wine, and maybe Harry, you can say something about what you think is our estate Riesling about all the time.
And don't forget that Philip's listening now.
I do. Yes, thank you. Nice to see you, Philip, again. What I like and what I like is the difference. Like you can definitely see the difference between the Mosel and the Rheinhessen, and then obviously even further to that, the Ansgar Clüsserath and the Wittman. So the Wittman has a lot more texture and a bit more weight and a bit more kind of, I'd say they're both balanced, but the Wittman seems to be a bit more like maybe a heavier balance. I'm not too sure how to say it, but there's like more of a mouth feel and more of a grip to it. While the Clüsserath probably is a bit more lively and has a bit more acid, but I think that might just be, like you said, the cool climate, slightly warmer. I mean, Australia is a hot climate, so you've still got 2 kind of cool climates when you look at it. I prefer the Wittman, but that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, what everyone needs to
question
keep in mind is...
Good question came through in the Zoom chat there from Dan. Just says, to a German Riesling newbie, could you talk more about residual sugar levels? What are the differences between these two, given they're both trocken, and then obviously the scaling up the levels there?
So,
yeah. Here in Rheinhessen, we are always below 3, or let's say always below 4 grams of residual sugar. So our wines are always bone dry. And this is also because of the ripeness we do have, that it's necessary to reduce the sugar in this bone dry level to come to the perfect balance and to get the saltiness in the texture, in the length of the wine. For Mosel, it's different. Of course, at the Mosel, this hint of residual sugar is always helpful to give some structure and to balance acidity sometimes. And so for Eva is one of the untypical Mosel estates where a lot of dry wines are also produced. So 70% of Eva's wines are fermented through, but she has a little bit more residual sugar in her wines than we have. So the dry style at Mosel means mostly around 6 grams of residual sugar.
Which I imagine probably comes to as a surprise. Obviously, the person asking that question has said that, you know, as a newbie, but obviously tasting those two wines, if anyone asked which one had the least, you know, which one was the drier, you probably go for the Clüsserath just because of that more piercing sense to it. To me, just talking about tasting those two wines as well, the Wittmann is, as is very typical, I think, for Philip's wines, has lovely intensity, but it's a really relaxed feeling wine. It's so fresh and vibrant, but just feels so relaxed on the palate, really at ease with itself. I think it's just delicious.
And I mean, what all of you guys need to keep in mind that we're talking about two different vintages.
Yeah.
So Eva's wine is from 2017, and for Wittmann we're talking about 2018. Both estate Rieslings, and I think it's a great way of seeing and comparing those two different soil types as well. So talking about limestone for Rheinhessen and the slate for Mosel, and the differences are obvious, but on the other hand as well really interesting. And I think it's a great chance for all of you to taste those different two regions and areas at the same time.
Yeah, I just wanted to dial back a little bit. I know there was a question that came from the chat that Ed answered, but just on the topic of organic and biodynamic certification and wine production. I know that it's quite a hot conversation here in Australia at the moment with more and more wine producers looking to convert to organics and biodynamics, and some that aren't maybe as keen as others and all the rest. It seems like it's very sort of happening at the moment. But I know in my experiences with a lot of wine that we see come through the shop here, whether it be German, Austrian or Alsatian, it seems more often than not, these wines are organically and biodynamically certified, you know, a large percentage of the time. Would you say that this style of organic and biodynamic farming is common, I guess, for lack of a better word, or you know, more readily available in Germany?
I think doing organic or not organic is something not always which has to do with what you want. It has a lot of stuff to do as well, what climatic situations you do have in your area. And this is one of these reasons why, for example, in the Mosel Valley, it's way harder to do organic. On the one hand, because it's steep slopes, it's a little bit more rain, and those two things, they do have a heavy impact on to do organic or not organic. And for us in Rheinhessen, it's easier to do organic because we have less rain and you can drive everything with a tractor, and it's I think one of those reasons why it's not always what you want. It's on the other hand as well what climatic situations you do have in your area.
So I personally think the most important point is respect for your vineyards, for your soils, and the idea should be to produce wines which reflect the place where the fruits are coming from. And so, of course, you could also work in a more conventional way and give the expression of the terroir too. So, but of course, it's maybe easier and more clear if you go into the pace of organic or biodynamic farming to reach this goal. So, in our personal situation, it's like this, that in Westhofen here in Rheinhessen for Wittmann, we do have a lot of experience about organic farming because my father has started quite early, and we have developed this step by step. And so also the step from organic to biodynamic was not a big step for us because we have had enough knowledge about biodynamics too, because we have checked a lot of things in the years before. At the end, I could say that there is also a difference between organic and biodynamic in the way that we do have healthier fruits nowadays in the end of the season. So we have longer hanging times of the fruits in a healthy texture, and this is quality-wise, of course, an enormous plus. So for us, biodynamic farming is helping us also to reach better qualities, and it's also one of the answers in the way of that there is influence for the climate change. And so I believe 100% in this way. And of course, we would like to have a organic or even a biodynamic farming too at the Mosel Valley, but it's just the situation at the moment that we can't come into the point that we do a certification, because through these steep slopes, these extreme hard work, and the situation that we have 150 kilometers from here to Mosel, we could not manage it in the perfect way at the moment that we could say it's strictly certified as organic. And so we keep in mind that we would like to produce terroir-driven wines, and so we have to respect the soil in the same way as we do here in Rheinhessen. But through the special situation and through the climate differences, it's not possible for us at the moment to reach the certification point, but it's still a goal in long terms.
Any other?
I'd probably going down the other direction. A question I know that I get asked quite a lot, and I'd be very interested to know about when you're sitting down over there in Germany and drinking these wines. What is the dish that kind of goes up with wines like this, food wise?
It's always good if you can drink a wine without a dish, because then it's a really well-made wine. But on the other hand, I mean, for sure, the obvious stuff with Riesling is always seafood, chicken, white meat, all this kind of stuff. But I think especially if Riesling's getting a little bit more matured, you can pair it wonderfully if you're doing a barbecue and the steak and stuff like that, because Rieslings gain a lot of power if they're getting a little bit older and the more these nutty characters. So it really depends if you have a fresh fruit-driven Riesling, or you do have something which is a little bit more matured and yeah.
Yeah, it's lunchtime here, I get hungry when Matthias is talking about food.
I've just seen a question pop up actually as well, Joe, just talking about flavor characteristics, which I will just asking about Phillip, what flavors you tend to look for in the Rheinhessen. I know it's a very big generalization, talking about fruit. Often we talk about the textures of the wines and how they differ and that sort of thing. But one of the tasters noticed a slightly more sort of stone fruity spectrum from your wine from the Rheinhessen. And I guess it's probably worth saying that that's probably a little bit more common down where you are, a little bit more round, sort of, I guess now and again, a little bit more fleshy stone fruit you get. How would you characterize, generally speaking, the spectrum that you would find in Westhoffen fruit?
Yeah, I think stone fruit is quite typical. It's very much depending on the ripeness level and on the vintage. So we start on a green apple side, which I not really like, but of course it's existing in the beginning of ripeness. Coming to the grapefruit, going more into the yellow stone fruit textures, apricot, of course, all these yellow fruits in question of ripeness getting more intense, and citric aromatics are almost to find, and it could go also into a spicy herbal aromatic depending on the vineyard side. So as you know, Ed, if we talk about Kirschspiel, I always say that it's more in the spicy herbal texture, comparing to Moorstein, which is more yellow stone fruit driven. And so this is an interesting point, that different terroirs do give you different aromatics too. But if we talk about the estate Riesling, which is an example from the whole village, it's more based on these yellow stone fruit aromatics.
Yeah. So those wines that Philip's talking about there come from a couple of the Grand Cru sites that he has, where these grapes are also grown around that same area. But that's Joe's next job, to introduce you to those absolutely mind-blowing Grand Cru dry Rieslings, of which Eva as well we have over in Australia from the Apotheker vineyard that Matthias showed you, a very, very fine dry Riesling from there. So it goes, as you go up the ladder, you really do come into very, very specific vineyard definitions of some amazing wines. So hopefully you'll continue that journey with Joe, obviously.
Yeah, I think that I kind of don't mind GG Riesling being our little secret here in Australia at the moment, because yep. As soon as we find people catch on about how good it actually is, there won't be enough around for us to enjoy it. But I think I said at the start, some of the ones that I've had from Wittman last year were some of the greatest white wines I've ever had, ever. Really, really outstanding. Yeah, delicious ones.
That's not my PP. All right. Anything else we can help you guys with?
I think that's been all the questions come through into the chat there. If anybody else has any more questions they want to throw into the chat, feel free. I don't know if the boys have to rush off anywhere soon. These are both.
I think everyone's still in isolation.
We've got someone about to ask some more. So and I thought this might come up actually. I was going to fill in the time by talking about it, but I guess it's worth saying just for these two producers then from Ansgar Clüsserath in Australia at the moment. This is obviously the dry introduction to the estate, the Vom Schiefer dry that we have. There's a village, a wine called the Trittenheimer Cabinet. So that's a slightly sweeter style, a kind of aperitif-y, I suppose, sweeter style from the village of Trittenheim, where the winery is based. Where you saw that beautiful place on the curve of the river. So that's the Trittenheim Village Cabinet. There's also, I don't know if you remember when Matthias was talking about the lovely but hard to pronounce names. One from the village of Peaceport, from the Gault vineyard. There's a very, very slightly off dry from there from 2014 that is absolutely smashing that we have available at the moment. And then at the top of the pile there, the Apotheker single vineyard Grand Cru dry wine as well. And from Philip, there's the estate. We have the Pinot Gris as well, the Grauburgunder at the moment from the estate, so about the same price as this wine. And then the village wine is sold out already, but there's a couple of those very, very impressive Grand Cru wines available too. So there's a few things out and about if you want to chase them up as well. You'll find them out there on the Google world.
I think also just on the sweet wines for that last question, you might be talking about I think the predicate system of Cabinet, Auslese, Spätlese, etc. It's not necessarily resembling how much residual sugar is in the grape. It's more about how much sugar is in the grape when it's picked. So there's a massive difference, it's not necessarily. Spätlese is between 60 and 80 residual sugar, and Cabinet is between 40 and 60. It doesn't quite come down to that kind of law. It comes down to how much sugar is in the grape when it's literally picked off the vine, and then it's what you do afterwards that can kind of make or break that wine. So if there's an excessive amount of sugar in the grape when you pick it, you can make Spätlese or Auslese, and it's going to end up costing you a fortune. Or you can pick it at a different level, ferment it a different way, and then you can actually make a dry wine that might have a Cabinet amount of sweetness. Like, it's not necessarily like a law of Cabinet is X, Spätlese is Y, and then Auslese is Z. It's not quite like that. It's more about.
But Philip, it's pretty rare that you make a sweeter style. Obviously, ever more common. They have the off-dry, the Feinherb, the Cabernet, Spätlese, etc. But in Rheinhessen, obviously, there's a bigger tradition of making most of the wines dry. What percentage of your wines would be dry from 2018?
98%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's of course it's a question of ripeness levels. Of course, it's interesting also to produce these Auslese and Bernauslese styles here because we get very rich and intense aromatics here. But for these classical, elegant Cabernet and Spätlese style, the Nordic regions are much more interesting, like Nahe, Rheingau, and Mosel, and therefore. You know, I have married a girl from the Mosel, so why to produce Cabernet and Spätlese in Rheinhessen then?
Yeah. So Philip likes drinking his wife's wines and wines from Champagne and others, and then his own wines for dry styles as well.
Cool.
All right.
Alrighty. Yeah, I mean, that's all the question. It's been an hour and 10 minutes on two wines, which I thought was absolutely incredible. So yeah, I guess otherwise I'm going to find a pretty good home for the remainder of these bottles, as I'm sure everybody else will joining along. But I suppose I might just wrap up the official proceedings for the tasting there and just give everybody a massive thank you to for helping me put this together. It really turned into something quite special with some really special bottles. So Ed, Harry, Matthias, and Philip, massive thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks Philip as well for the cameo that we weren't expecting.
Thank you very much, Philip. Yeah, thank you.
I just checked if Matthias is on work, and then I'm sitting here, you know.
He's just sitting down drinking Riesling at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, right. I have this small fridge you find in your hotel room. I got that beside my computer.
Like he says, who needs a meal?
I'm sure that the 50,000 people watching this will enjoy it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Joe.
No worries, guys. Thanks so much. And also, again, a huge thank you to everybody joining in on Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom alike that pretty much made this all possible. Easily the most well-received virtual tasting I've run so far, and that comes off the back of some amazing oak barrel customers that give me something to do on a Wednesday night. Alrighty, I am going to take down the Facebook, YouTube.